everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to bring you guys my end of June reading wrap up. I have 12 books exactly to talk about in today's video, so this video should be relatively short and sweet. I say that, but then watch this video be just as long as all of my other wrap-ups. So the reason why I didn't read quite as many books as I thought I was going to in the second half of June is because in the last week of the month, I was trying to just work my way through two really chunky books. So I wasn't finishing as many books as I personally would have liked, but June was still a really great reading month for me. I read 30 books total in June, and 15 of those books were 5-star reads, which is amazing. I think I've talked about this a little bit recently, but I do kind of feel like I've been in a bit of a reading slump, definitely in May and probably into March and April as well. So now I feel like I'm finally out of that, and it's just so amazing to see that I'm reading so many books that I'm absolutely loving. So without further ado, let's just jump into the 12 books that I read in the last half of June. The first one we have is Nerdgasm by Kimberly Reese. So I totally have to shout out Ava from Ava's Romance Books. She has been trying to get me to read this novella for a while because I know that she's recommended it to me more than once. And when we were in Atlanta a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the novella again, and I was like, oh my god, I actually need to pick that up. And this is on Kindle Unlimited, by the way. We have our two main characters, Theo and Addie. Theo, he grew up with a stutter all his life, and I do want to point out that Kimberly Reese, she wrote an author's note at the beginning of the novella talking about the research that she put into this novella, but she also recognizes that obviously the representation is not going to be perfect because it's not own voices. But yes, Theo, because he grew up with a stutter, he is also just very shy. He's also a nerdy hero. And so our hero and heroine meet because Theo is a TA for a college class that Addie is taking, and so they just have this immediate connection with each other. One of the things I really loved about this novella is that Addie, our heroine, is the one pursuing Theo, our hero. He's just so sweet and shy, and she is the one to actually ask him out on their first date. Also, Theo is a virgin hero. He is just the sweetest man on the planet. He must be protected at all costs. He is one of my new book boyfriends, potentially a book husband. Yes, I have multiple book husbands. Yes, he is just everything to me. And I also loved how well him and Addie paired with each other. And when Addie fucked up, she learned from her mistakes. I do want to point out about this novella that Theo is very, very close to the guy that he is TAing for. His name is Cohen. He's actually going to be the main character of the next novella in the series. Who knows when that is coming out. But there is a scene in this novella where Theo asks Cohen basically for sex tips because Theo is a virgin. He doesn't really know what he's doing. And so Cohen just gives a very interesting lecture. I just wanted to throw that out there so that you know to suspend your disbelief, because it is kind of wacky and ridiculous, but I still loved it, and this entire novella, nonetheless, I cannot recommend it highly enough. So next up we have Hench. This is by Natalie, Zina, Walschots. This was a recommendation that I got from Riley Marie, and this is essentially a very dark and twisted superhero, supervillain story. Definitely gave me so many vibes of The Boys, which is a show on Amazon Prime. It's also a series of comic books, I believe, because both that show and this book center around the idea that superheroes may not be all that good of people. They may be kind of corrupt, basically. So we have Anna. She basically works for this temp agency, and she works specifically for supervillains. Like, she's really great at analyzing data specifically. So she's working for this one supervillain, and basically the villain is trying to kidnap, I believe, the mayor's son. And so this superhero, who is known as Super Collider, he shows up to save the boy who is being kidnapped, but Anna accidentally gets in his way And so he goes to just push her out of the way, but of course he has superhuman strength. And so he literally slams her into a wall and shatters her leg. And so the first part of this book is her trying to just come to terms with that injury, trying to heal, and now she is hell-bent on revenge. So this is like one of the most iconic villain origin stories ever. Basically, she starts working for another supervillain who is Super Collider's like #1 nemesis. And she forms this team where their job is to mess with Super Collider's life and other superheroes as well, because they're trying to get these superheroes to like snap and do bad things on camera so that the public will learn that they're not actually good people, and that there is a lot of collateral damage that is caused by these superheroes. So this was amazing. Another 5-star read for me. The pacing was top-notch in my opinion. There are definitely scenes in here that feel very cinematic. I could very clearly imagine what was going on in my mind. Like, this is definitely a superhero movie in book form. It's just so well done. So many twists and turns. You will not be able to guess where this story goes. And oh man, thank you so much, Riley, for bringing this book to my attention, because it's definitely one of the best books that I've read this year. I think it's absolutely amazing, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. So next up, I want to quickly talk about the 2 Sarah J. Maas books that I read in June for SJM along. So we did just do our live show for Queen of Shadows, which is right here. This is book 4 of the Throne of Glass series on my channel, so I will link that up in the cards above. That ended up being a pretty long live show because there's just a lot to discuss with this book for sure. But we also read The Assassin in the Underworld, which is the 4th novella in The Assassin's Blade, which is a bind-up of 5 prequel novellas. So it actually worked out well that we were reading this specific novella before going into Queen of Shadows, because you get a lot of backstory about Arabin and Lysandra, who are 2 characters that play a pretty major role in Queen of Shadows. So I'm really glad that I reread this novella before going into this book. I gave it 4 stars upon reread. These novellas are nothing amazing, but they do give interesting context and backstory to the main part of the series. So then, yes, we have Queen of Shadows, book 4 of the series. I don't have much to say here in this video because, like I said, that live show was over 2 hours long, and I went into great detail about my thoughts about everything going on in this book, as did my lovely co-hosts. But what I will say here is that, unfortunately, this is one of those books where any rereading experience I have will never compare to the first time that I read this. Because this is such a plot-based book and there are so many plot twists and turns, that makes for an incredible first time experience. But then upon reread, like, obviously I knew the big plot twists. I knew kind of what was coming, even though it's been about 3 years since I read this series for the first time. So while I still definitely loved this reread, like I said, it will never compare to the first time that I read this book. I did also notice this time around that the first 200 pages, I would say, are a bit of a chore to get through. But once we get to about page 200, the pacing really picks up, and this book is just incredible. Still one of my top favorite books of the series, but I'm also really looking forward to rereading the rest of the books because I have a feeling that Empire of Storms might be my new top favorite book of the series. Next up, we have yet another 5-star read. Man, I was just having a good time in June. This is Not My Type by Evie Mitchell. This is a book that I've heard Bree from In 11 Words rave about a lot, and I was so excited about this book because of both the disability representation. Our heroine Frankie is a wheelchair user, but also the plot centers around Frankie and how she has this podcast that basically centers around accessibility. And it sounds like a lot of her episodes center around sex and making sex accessible. And so she gets a question, I believe, from a listener to do an episode about shibari, which is the art of rope tying in BDSM, and how to make that accessible for people with disabilities. And so she approaches our hero Jay, who is someone that she kind of grew up with, I think, but she doesn't really know him all that well. And so as soon as they meet, sparks fly, and things just go on from there. I loved this so much. Like, the dynamic between Jay and Frankie was everything for me from the beginning. I loved Jay because he's kind of one of those heroes at the beginning. He comes off as very like irreverent and just very flirtatious, like isn't really taking anything too seriously, doesn't want to be in a relationship, but he also can't help but fall head over heels for Frankie. And this was just the perfect balance of sweet and sexy. And I also highly recommend the audiobook because Jacob Morgan narrates Jay's POV, and Jacob Morgan's voice, it is absolute perfection. Next up, we have another novella. This is Stuck With You by Hazelwood. I believe this is technically book 2 in her STEMinist novellas series, which is a series of 3 novellas that center around these 3 best friends finding love. So this one has a couple of different tropes going on. We have our 2 main characters, Sadie and Eric. They both are engineers, but they work for rival companies. And so we see through a series of flashbacks, because basically the chapters will alternate between the present, when Sadie like absolutely hates Eric's guts, but now they're stuck in an elevator together, so they're forced to talk about why she hates him. And then the past, when they have this immediate attraction and they go out on a date and they have this like amazing one-night stand. So what I do want to point out about this novella is that there is some miscommunication happening. What does make me a bit sad about the miscommunication in this novella is that it made Eric believe that Sadie didn't want the sexual things that he did with her during their one-night stand, and so he just feels like a shitty person. And so when they're stuck together in the elevator, the first thing he does is apologize to her because she's been avoiding him for the last like 3 weeks. And so yeah, them being stuck, it forces the truth to come out. And yeah, this was cute though. I did give it 4 stars overall. These novellas aren't anything all that special, but they're still a fun time, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading the 3rd one, which is called Below Zero. So now I'm so excited. We get to talk about one of my top favorite books that I read in June, and that is Unhinged by Onley James. I just learned that Onley James is a pen name for a YA author, which is very interesting. And I find it interesting too that she would publicly post her pen name, like what her name actually is. That's really interesting to me. But this is book 1 in her Necessary Evil series. This centers around 7 young boys that were taken in by this billionaire scientist dude named Thomas. And all 7 of these boys were showing signs of being a sociopath and or psychopath. And so he decided to take them in and raise them as his own to be serial killers, to bring horrible people to justice, aka killing them when the justice system fails, basically. So they are kind of like vigilantes, and there's definitely a found family aspect between these 7 boys that are now brothers, and now they're all grown up. And then Thomas, who is like their adoptive father. And so this first book is about Adam and Noah. So this is a really interesting setup. Noah has been stalking Adam for a little while. He saw Adam kill his father 10 years before the main part of this book starts. And so now Noah is hellbent on revenge and killing Adam. But when they meet, they have this insane attraction, and Adam is able to talk Noah down so he doesn't do something that he will regret later. And so this is pretty insta-lusty, insta-lovey between Adam and Noah, but I didn't care because there was just something about the writing and the story that was just so addictive to me. And oddly enough, this is like the sweetest and most wholesome romance ever. I never thought that I would be talking about a wholesome serial killer romance before, but here we are. There's a couple of things that I really loved about this couple. There was so much clear communication between these 2 characters, both in and out of the bedroom, I might add. loved that. And I also loved that because Adam, you know, doesn't feel the way that normal people do, he would ask advice about how to take care of Noah, because in this book, Noah's going through a lot of like PTSD essentially about like what happened to him when he was a child, and Adam doesn't quite know how to help him and how to take care of him, and so he asks advice. And so there's just really great caretaking going on in this novel as well. So yeah, I could go on about this book forever and ever. Absolutely fantastic, and I cannot wait to read the rest of this series very soon. Next up, we have Melissa and the Vicar by S.M. LaViolette. This is a pen name that Minerva Spencer uses. So Minerva Spencer is a historical romance author, and she uses this pen name, I believe, for her more erotic and or just indie published historical romances. And so this is book 1 in the Seducer series. I was turned on to this series by Jen from the book Refuge, and I definitely am looking forward to reading the other 2 books in this series. And I did enjoy this one overall. I gave it 3.5 stars. So this story is about Melissa, who was a sex worker, but now she is the owner of a brothel. And she gets very ill. It's not consumption, it's something with like her like gastric system. I can't quite remember, but it causes her to like cough up blood. Like, it's a very serious illness. And so the only treatment they had for this kind of thing back then was to send you out into the country and hope for the best so that you could breathe fresh air and recover away from the hustle and bustle of London. And so she goes to this village. She takes a couple of friends of hers to pose. Like, one of her friends is posing as her aunt and chaperone, and then a couple, like one of her other friends is posing as her maid, but these are all women that work at the brothel with her. So it's actually kind of funny to see these women try to pretend to be like ladies of society and nobility when they definitely aren't that. And then we have Magnus, who is, he's not a full-on vicar yet. He's like almost there, but he's kind of the vicar's assistant in this village. And so Melissa and Magnus have this instant connection. I will say that this is kind of insta-lovey, and I didn't absolutely love that. Sometimes insta-love really works and sometimes it doesn't, and I feel like in this case it didn't quite work for me. I think overall this book could have been edited more, but I did enjoy it for what it was. I also love that we have a virgin hero, and we did have some teaching going on between Melissa and Magnus in terms of their sexy times, but the only thing I didn't love about that is that the teaching would happen off page. Like, they would be having sex and Magnus would be doing something to her, and then in his inner monologue he would just say, oh, she taught me how to do that. And I'm like, no, I wanted to see her teach you how to do that. You know what I mean? So yeah, not my absolute favorite historical romance ever by any means. However, I'm definitely still looking forward to reading the other 2 books in this series because the characters that those books are going to center around are very intriguing to me. Next up, we have The Good Samaritan by John Marrs. This is now my 3rd book that I have read by John Marrs. He is a very talented thriller writer, I have to say. And this one, y'all, the plot of this one is bonkers, just like the other thrillers that I've read by him. But this one is arguably like the most fucked up of the thrillers that I've read by him, because we're centering around our main character who works for this hotline. It's called End of the Line. It's kind of a suicide hotline, but it's also just a hotline that anybody can call when they're not doing well mentally. And basically the job of these operators is to just like listen to these people and maybe point them in the right direction of getting help, but mainly it's just to listen, really. But our main character likes to, let's say, encourage people to end their lives. Yeah, there it is. So basically the whole catalyst of this plot is that she encourages this woman to end her life, and this woman's fiance does some sleuthing and figures out that she encouraged his fiance to commit suicide, and now he is hell-bent on revenge. And so it's this very interesting game of cat and mouse between these 2 characters for pretty much the rest of the book. As usual with John Marrs, the pacing was exquisite. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. This is not necessarily my favorite book that I've read by him, but it's still very solid, and I would recommend it if you can deal with the subject matter, because it does, obviously it deals a lot with suicide, and like I said, it's pretty fucked up. We have just a couple books left. The first one I have to talk about is Kink Camp Hunted by A. Anders, who is Adriana Anders. This is a pen name that she is using for this erotic romance novella series, and basically the concept is that this centers around this kink camp, and what's really interesting is that the author put an author's note at the beginning of this novella talking about how she has been to one of these kink camps before. But a kink camp is basically a place where people can go enjoy whatever kinks they want with whomever they want. Obviously, consent is key here. And this novella centers around our main character, Grace, and how she has a primal kink. Primal kink is basically when you want to be like hunted or chased down, maybe in the woods somewhere, and then have sexy times. So you could either be the prey or the hunter. She wants to be the prey. And so at the coffee shop at this kink camp, there is a flyer where this man is looking for someone to be his prey. And so she answers the ad and things go on from there. I gave this 3 stars and I feel like that was a bit generous. It's probably more of a 2.5 star read. The only reason why I read this when I did was because McKay and Cheyenne picked this for their smut book club. I'm gonna link that live show down in the description below because I was actually watching the live and leaving a lot of comments, so you'll be able to see like all of my thoughts about this novella. But basically, I thought that it was pretty slow paced the entire time, and I feel like this novella wanted to be erotica and it wanted to be a romance at the same time, but yet it wasn't quite an erotic romance. I feel like it kind of just wanted to be both the two separate things, and it didn't succeed at doing either, in my opinion. But I do think the concept is interesting, and I'm very looking forward to the next book because the characters that one is going to center around are really intriguing. We got a taste of who those people are in this novella. Next up, we have Dared by My Roommate by Cassie Mint. You guys knew a Cassie Mint novella was going to be in this wrap up, right? This is technically a part of a series that a bunch of different authors have contributed to, and so all of the novellas though are roommate romances. And so this one is about Lincoln and Jenny. Jenny's roommate just like skips town and like steals things from her, you know, just leaves. And so she desperately needs a roommate now, and so she puts this really interesting and kind of funny ad up like on Craigslist basically. And Lincoln is someone who desperately needs a place to stay. He travels around the world a lot because he's a photographer, and so he doesn't really stay in one place, but he needs a place to stay for the next few months, and so he answers the ad. And so it's a romance between the two of them. I love these kind of romances where we have like an outgoing flirty hero and a shy heroine. This was just really great, really solid from Cassie Mint. I gave it 4 stars. Last but certainly not least, we ended June with a 5-star read. This is Barbarian's Redemption by Ruby Dixon. This is book 13 in her Ice Planet Barbarian series. So this series is definitely a commitment, but it has totally been worth reading the first 12 books to get to this story. So this is about Beck and Ellie, and at the end of the previous book in this series, which is Barbarian's Choice, by the way, this is an alien romance series, science fiction series. I wanted to point that out in case you don't know, but this is also a series that blew up on Book Talk, so I'm sure a lot of you know about this. But at the end of the previous book, Beck made this deal with these other aliens to go buy some human women and bring them back to the ice planet, because now there are no more human women for these alien men to mate with. And he's just wanted a mate for so long, and he's just incredibly lonely, and he's desperate at this point. So the aliens end up going and buying these 5 human women from the slave trade and bringing them to the ice planet. And so Ellie is one of these women, and Ellie has been mute for quite a few years. She was kidnapped from Earth when she was like 13, and she's been a slave ever since then. She's had various different owners. obviously has led a very traumatic life. And now she's on this ice planet where these alien men want mates. And so obviously she's very freaked out. But I thought that the way that Ruby Dixon wrote both Beck's redemption arc and Ellie's healing journey was spectacular. Like, this book is totally a huge step up from the previous 12 books in this series. Like, I cannot recommend it enough. I actually teared up quite a bit while reading this. There's just some really powerful scenes in this in general, and the romance was really great. All right, guys, that's going to be it for the 12 books that I read in the second half of June. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video, or if you want to talk about books that you read in June that you really loved. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye! That is Unhinged by Onley James. So this is book 1 in their, I should probably look up what their pronouns are. Wow.